A common misconception of the professional Overwatch players that exist is that they just grind for 16 plus hours a day. Spoiler alert, that's simply not true, generally speaking, and the reality may actually surprise you. And you can trust the information I am giving you, not because I myself have been through it, but because, as you'll see throughout the video, I actually interviewed people who do know. Some of these people, many of you will likely know, folks like Spilo and CoachCuffy, and even a lesser known tier 2 player who shared a story that I think is incredibly powerful. The number one misconception by far across the community is that pros just sit and play 12 plus hours a day of ranked.
I've chatted and worked with probably around 20 to 30 tier 1 players over the years, either that have become tier 1 or who are in tier 1. Basically, it really is a full-time job. You're working at least 8 hours a day, sometimes as many 10 or 12. When I say working, I'm generally count like either very, very high quality hours or medium quality hours. There's lots of other pros that do a lot more than that, but I don't think that they get full value out of it. And generally that's kind of broken down into, I would say, probably 3 tiers of specific work. One is going to be the scrim hours. And for most teams, that's going to be anywhere from 4 to 6. I personally have always been a subscriber of the 4 hours of scrims a day. I've been part of many teams at both the tier 2 and tier 1 level that have done 6 hours of scrims. And it is the exception, not the rule, that those are productive, because generally the amount of effort that scrimmages require is like the highest level of effort and focus, like full energy, full time, not a lot of downtime, not a lot of breaks, even if you're taking your 5-minute break. And so after those 4 hours, generally that's like where all your energy and effort went into. The second tier of break that I would say of work section would be more educational study. This would be team review, individual review, self-review, whatever that may be. I don't know a lot of pro players that do a ton of review on every day. I would say a good balance would be anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours, depending on the team. Most teams that I have coached myself or have been part of generally have a balance of around 30 minutes to an hour of team review per day, and then anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes of individual review, either self-review or with another coach on that same day. And that can depend on the difficulty of the coaching. Sometimes we have to teach a new concept and give ourselves some goals for the scrimmage. That's generally the most important review, usually at the start.
Absolutely.
And then individual review can be on an as needed basis. Some of my reviews would go very, very long with Overwatch League players, but generally that was introducing a concept, discussing, and then further follow-up reviews would generally be much shorter. Just status checks. How's the practice going? How are the questions? I'm POVing you during the scrim block. These are a couple of awkward points. Let's try and hammer these out, but it's going to be really, really fast. And then I think something that's, underrated by a lot of tier 1 players, certainly by tier 2 and tier 3 players, is the ability to study POVs other than themselves, and also study POVs of themselves, just self-review, spending time yourself, getting new ideas, introducing themselves to new concepts, new rotations, and just kind of not necessarily looking for feedback or advice from players better than themselves, but also critiquing those players. Like when I'm watching Proper on Tracer, let's see what he's doing well. Let's see if I can pick out the mistakes that he's making, right? Then let's go look back at my play and let's try to find the differences, things that I'm doing better than him, things that he's doing better than me. Let's get some goals. Just give yourself a different perspective. And then the third tier of work is what I just kind of call like the brainless mechanical work. And this is just going to be basically grinding ranked. You're going in, you're playing ranked, you're doing whatever. We were in an awkward position at the start of Overwatch 2 because we didn't have ranked. We only had quick play for a very brief period of time, and then we didn't have anything at all. So a lot of teams were doing 3 scrim blocks. I know at the time that there was definitely a concerted effort to try to give full effort for 3 scrim blocks, but I honestly think if you're playing ranked as a pro player, you might get like an hour of good ranked play, but if you're playing ranked, for the most part, it's just kind of like brainless mechanical grind, nothing really deliberate or nothing really specific. It can be especially useful if you're trying to sharpen up your mechanics on a character that you're not as strong with, but for the most part, I think like at that point in time, it's mostly just fluff, and you're probably better off at that point in time after an hour or 2 of rank, just stepping away from the PC, playing something else, being social, getting exercise, reading a book, doing something along those lines to make yourself in a better position for the next day.
The truth is, ranked gameplay couldn't be further from the reality of an esports player at the highest level. Simply put, the highest level of Overwatch brings out a team play focus rather than your individual ability to carry a game. Additionally, it would seem that there were some poor habits that were picked up that exacerbated this line of thinking during the 2020 lockdowns across Europe and the United States.
Honestly, it's quite interesting because I came from a time where when I was grinding the game, it was actually locked down. So there was a lot of unhealthy habits. When I first peaked in the leaderboards, I was probably committing around 16 hours a day, but I didn't have school,
Wow.
I didn't have work because it was locked down. But that's definitely not the case now. Especially like now that I've kind of branched out into other esports, I kind of see the more realistic number. And how I always put it is like, you're not gonna improve from playing 16 hours a day. Even like genuinely playing 2 to 4 hours a day of like focused learning is better than committing 10 plus hours of just rage queuing. You know what I mean? I would say that the most healthy people
Right, right.
that is still like grinding and probably consistently gonna do well is like anywhere between the 3 hour to 8 hours a day is a sweet spot. Like I think you can be completely healthy and play 3 to 8 hours. It's just about like the contents of what you're actually doing, if that makes sense.
A great way to understand what ranked is to a professional Overwatch player is to understand what quick play is to the average Overwatch player. Normal folks like us just meme a bit in quick play. Sure, we're trying to win, but we don't mind losing as much as we do in competitive. Pro players, on the other hand, can afford to treat competitive like we treat quick play, in my opinion, because they have nothing to prove. What pro players actually do far more than playing ranked is participate in scrims. For those that are unfamiliar with the term, scrims are essentially skirmishes that put you up against players and teams that are collectively either at your skill level or substantially higher. This practice is fundamentally much more important than ranked because you are learning to play as a team, which is the quintessential focus of high-level play. Scrims are a whole different animal, and I don't think a lot of people get that. Like, it is not just ranked. Ranked and scrims are completely worlds apart.
Yeah, like they're two completely different things. Scrims are so serious, and it takes like so much of your energy to play for so long. And ranked is kind of like, you can try hard, but it's also kind of chill.
While I regrettably didn't get into the general morning routine of anybody that I interviewed, I do think there is a logical way to walk this out. I want to start by saying that I've always kind of pictured in my head that the pro player would roll out of bed at noon, go ahead and make their freshen up energy that they used code HOPE at checkout to save 20% off their order on, and then get straight to scrims. Being older now, I realize not only the importance of having a really good morning routine, but also the ability to keep a very, very strict sleep schedule. Additionally, as I've watched more and more of the OWCS, I have noticed that you don't see a lot of the players with a large amount of energy drinks to their side. It's typically a label-less bottle of water. I don't want to spend too much time in this video talking about this strictly because I didn't interview the people who I have already accredited to know a lot more than I do. But I will say that, again, if you agree with the logic thoughts and you'd like to see what my thoughts are in general on that, I did create a video on the physical habits I believe can help boost your performance. If you want to check that out, the link's in the description. You're welcome to go look at that. Throughout the player's day, there are typically 2 to 3 scrim blocks that they go through. Each of those scrim blocks lasts 1 to 2 hours, with breaks in between each individual match that last at most 2 to 3 minutes on average.
I'm more of a scrim direction type of guy, especially because I go into coaching pro teams with the assumption that these guys know how to improve in their free time, which honestly a lot of the time isn't the case. But I think most pro teams are scrimming at least 2 hours every single day, like 6 times a week at least. Most teams are double blocking, so 4 hours scrims, probably like 4 or 5 times a day, and then a couple days a week. A lot of pro teams triple block as well. So anywhere between 2 to 6 hours a day in scrim. But how I would put it is, you don't want to burn out, but the time spent playing the game doesn't need to change. So if you have 2 hours of scrims, I would recommend you work on something in the other 4 hours of your day in ranked, if that makes sense. But obviously, if you're triple blocking, that's 6 hours of intensive scrims. I'm not gonna force my players to play ranked on that day.
Yeah,
you know
you
what I mean?
probably
Like,
tap out after that, yeah.
That's crazy.
From my very limited experience at a platinum scrim level, coaches take the time often to track mistakes in real time, give thoughts, and change compositions as you go. Imagine studying for finals, but every wrong answer you get is looked over with a fine-tooth comb and exposed for what it really is, whether it's in the moment or in a VOD review with that coach later. After one scrim block, typically players have a short break of maybe 30 to 60 minutes in between and they get into their second block. But during peak seasons, like, the actual competitive season, they may not get a break at all between blocks, and they may actually see 3 back-to-back scrim blocks. But when you do have those breaks, a focused player is going to take the time to VOD review, whether it's themselves or with a coach, their own gameplay and or looking at the team's play through the eyes of the enemies. If the coaches participate, they'll point out positioning errors, ult usage, and several other things that go well beyond just the general things, and they're referred to as micro. Improvement in the game comes less from raw grinding and more from intentional, fine-toothed analysis and focused effort in those areas you need to improve. Once a player identifies a problem they need to work on, it is typically their focal point until that problem is resolved. After scrims are over, some players might actually play ranked, but it's not typically mandatory. Ranked is used for mechanical warm-ups and maybe your specific hero pool you're trying to practice. But also keep in mind that while we will get to income in a more specific point later, they will sometimes actually use ranked as a way to create content on the internet, which you will see those players play a lot more ranked. That is because, strictly speaking, it's almost impossible to make a living in esports, particularly in Overwatch, as its own thing. So like I said, many players will maintain a personal brand and online presence to help them supplement their income. They've contracted you, but it's not quite enough to live on. Most teams can't pay quite enough to live on. I don't know what Sweden's cost of living is like, but what would you do? Like, how do you think you would go about paying your bills and allowing yourself to have the time to grind and play Overwatch?
That's a good question. When I was actually playing semi-pro, I used to stream, and I really enjoyed that. So I would probably stream and make like content again.
However, I will say from experience that ad revenue from both streaming and video content does not typically make enough to provide for an actual living. That's why folks like myself, as a content creator, create options that give people perks for supporting you at a financial level that allows you to be a full-time creator. For me, it's things like bi-weekly Patreon-only games that you get access to at $5 a month over on Patreon. If you are interested in supporting, you can check the link that is in the description of this video. Back to pro players though, real briefly on this last point. Many of them will find that content creation is actually more lucrative and more enjoyable, so they'll slowly but surely abandon the professional playing track altogether. A great example of this is XQC, because while he admittedly had a great run in his professional career as an Overwatch player, he has way transcended that since becoming an actual content creator. Another point. Contrary to popular belief, pros do and should have a life outside of the game. Even pros need downtime. Without it, like we saw with our tier 2 interview that I did, you can actually burn out and end your career significantly prematurely.
When I started scrimming, I was really young. I was like 14, 15-ish. And I was really dedicated to actually making it in the pro scene.
Yeah.
So I did a dumb decision and I dropped out of school, which was very dumb. So I was putting all my effort into going pro. I was just sitting at my computer like 12 hours a day, just playing every day. I would not go outside or anything. When I didn't scrim or play comp, I would just get VODed or look at my own gameplay.
Sure. So you were by definition, you were a grinder for sure.
Yeah, I was a nerd.
Well, yeah, nerds. I mean, pretty much all gamers are nerds. So I don't think that's. I think that kind of goes without saying. But I wonder. You kind of alluded to the idea that it may have been something that you regretted to some degree, at least so in as so far as you dropping out of school. You said it was a dumb decision. Do you feel like, and if you're willing to answer this, do you feel like it was a dumb decision in your mind to play for 12 hours a day, or do you feel like, no, I think for the time in my life it was okay, or like what are your thoughts on that looking back?
I still think that me dedicating to Overwatch was like a good decision, but I could have tuned it down a little bit.
Sure, there was a balance that maybe could have been struck.
Like a balance, yeah.
Part of that life, of course, is spent with your teammates, and while it is rare, sometimes there are team houses where that camaraderie is built naturally by just existing together.
But I think more so than anything else, you definitely need to kind of like break apart the segmentation between the Korean players and the English players. And I don't know if that's easily done without a team house. And I think most successful mixed teams that we've seen have been teams that are able to kind of mix these players together. I think coaches that do a great job are ones that both have required mandatory team activities with both sides of the equation, but then also give some time for players to be their own individuals and set up. I mean, you're going to have friend groups, you're going to have little cliques. I think it's letting that happen is naturally is okay, but then having certain designated times. All right, we got to be a team here. Let's hang out. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. I know Askoft, a coach I greatly respect, had something a little bit like that. Not as much with the mixed team, but even with just the English-speaking teams, right? Like, let's not go off on our own little cliques. Let's, at the end of a game, let's go to McDonald's. Let's hang out. Let's chat. Let's relax for an hour, and then you're allowed to go do whatever you want. So you kind of have a little bit of mandatory, and then let the rest develop naturally.
Having a good work-life balance is so important, regardless if this is Overwatch as your job or anything else, because as you go through life, your hobbies are what keeps you fulfilled most of the time. Some of us, like myself, are fortunate that we get to use our hobbies as a way to earn some income. But realistically, on the other side of an esports career, probably somewhere in your 30s, maybe early 40s, in extremely rare cases, you need to step away from the esports playing portion and do something else with your life.
Whether you're trying to improve your mechanics, your game sense, your communication, whatever, it demands a level of energy and focus. And anything that you're doing at that point in time, kind of autopilot, doesn't really do anything. And if it can anything, harm you. And so it just requires a level of intensity of work that is unusually difficult. Like, if you're a professional player, you only have, I would say, anywhere from 4 to 5 hours of intense work per day. But you will find successful teams that actually have 4 to 5 hours of intense work per day. There's a famous anecdote that gets swapped around a lot of the season 1 Shanghai Dragons, who I think scrimmed anywhere from 3 to 6 blocks per day and lost every game, right? Now, they were a bad team. Like, they had a lot of really bad players. They just were never going to be able to play catch up to that level. But the worst thing they could have done in that position was to do that and just grind brainlessly, and just there's no intention with what you're doing. And so most teams I know, it's not through a lack of visible effort, it's through a lack of actual effort that they're actually able to make progress as a team or as an individual.
Earlier and throughout this video, I've actually mentioned that esports themselves are not strictly speaking profitable, but there is a way to be able to structure it to earn a living.
I think there are multiple different ways, like you say. Like I don't think that is dissimilar to the way that I earn money. For example, players that are contracted, which is most pro players, like 90% of pro players are contracted. But you'll notice that for some teams, even in like top tier, that could mean something as small as like $500 a month. Other teams, it could be $5,000 a month. You see what I'm saying? There is a bit of, I don't want to say luck, but obviously if you're under a big org, you probably deserve it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you've probably gotten there you've gotten there for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah. That is where like an element of being better than everyone kind of pays off. I would say earnings, you cannot live off of esports earnings. Earnings is simply just a bonus. That's like, you worked well, you know what I mean? You worked well at work.
Right, in your corporate job, so and your boss said, yeah, good job.
Your boss is like, yo, let's throw in a couple $100 there, you know what I mean? That's what prize money, like earnings is. It's just simply a bonus. Obviously, the placement will help you get better, stronger contracts, better opportunities, sponsorships, like you say. But I would split it in half. I think as a coach, being a content creator and a coach is not as easy as being a player and a content creator. If you're a talented player, people want to see that. People don't really necessarily care about being a talented coach per se, you know?
Right. It doesn't create as much content that engages with a larger audience.
Yeah, but it goes both ways, right? So if you're a talented player and you have a social media presence, you're going to get a lot of money that way. Similarly, as a coach, I'm going to get a lot of money from private coaching sessions. It doesn't really matter how much or how many views. Obviously, is like a trend. If my views are up, my money is up. You know what I mean?
That goes together. Absolutely.
But the same way players can make social media accounts, we can privately coach, and a lot of our income comes that way. So that's contracts, that's private coaching or social media. If you want to get picked up by a team that has a big social media presence, just make sure you're marketable, make sure you're entertaining.
Yeah.
This industry is based off of viewership. It's based off of views. We're not just athletes, we're also entertainers, you know what I mean? And we have to treat it that way. People want to see us, and we gotta make sure that like we're actually entertaining. Like, there's nothing worse than a pros team or like supporting a team full of individuals that are just dull and boring, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why like XQC did so well. Right, and still
Exactly,
does,
yeah.
because he's got a, I mean, love or hate the guy, his personality is wild. Like, it's way out there. In short, you can make great money playing esports, but you do need to diversify your income sources. Another really important misconception is that discipline doesn't actually matter at all, and it is strictly talent that gets you in and keeps you in this whole scene. This is completely wrong. Overwatch and esports in general need that structure. They need that discipline to continue to grow and grind at a sustained pace.
Yeah, I mean, with discipline, it's essentially putting yourself standards of what I expect out of myself and what I know that I need to get done. The tricky part with discipline is it, as you know, demands a lot of maturity to know how to interpret. I've worked a lot. This is not just an Overwatch thing, but this is a big thing within the fitness community with a lot of the people that I've worked with. It's a big thing in the martial arts community, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, where discipline is basically paraphrased as doing what you don't want to do, essentially.
Right. Sure.
Whereas reality discipline is more so doing what you ought to do. Sometimes discipline is not doing something. Sometimes discipline is saying, no, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to lay off, or I'm injured, or, I need to get my sleep, or I can only scrim. Like, discipline at times has been, no, we're not going to do this scrim block because we're too tired, we're too tilted to put effort into that scrim block. So we're not going to do it. It's hard to say we're passing up practice, but it takes discipline to make that decision. So to me, discipline and willpower is like something that you have to spend with a lot of maturity and a lot of wisdom. Is this something that I don't want to do because it's uncomfortable, but I probably should do it? Or is it something that I'm just doing it because it's difficult, and because it's difficult, it's something that I ought to do? And I think that's something where you have to be very careful with drawing the line, where there's a lot of young men, especially out there, that we romanticize difficulty for the sake of difficulty.
Missing scrims, being late, or even just trolling in practice will probably lose you your spot on the roster, or you will be benched. The job of playing in Overwatch esports is just as much about professionalism as it is about raw skill. Talent admittedly gets you noticed, but discipline is what keeps you in the league. My firm belief is that if you have time, dedication, and focus, you can make it despite whether or not you have talent. So what does a real day of an Overwatch esports player look like? It looks like waking up, grinding scrims, taking a break, breathing for a bit, and repeating after you've had a couple of odd review sessions. It is not 16 hours a day of mindless gaming, more like 8 to 10 hours of regular focused training. And yes, because of that, there is time for life outside of the game while you compete. But don't mistake that life balance for the job being easy. It still requires an immense amount of effort. So next time someone says, oh, they just sit on their computers and play games all day, hopefully you'll know better. Esports is actually work, and it does require discipline in order to succeed at, and I think it's worth doing and worth pursuing if you have those things that I mentioned earlier. I mean, for those that are wired for it and have the time to pursue it, you can make a crazy awesome career out of this. Recently, I personally discovered that while I really do believe I am wired for esports, I don't have the time and energy, and as well as many other things, to put into my OWCS journey that many of you have found me from. To hear more about that, make sure you click this video right over here on your screen, and you'll be able to get quite a bit more of the details of what I actually discovered and what I think ultimately killed that journey for me, at least for the foreseeable future.